The year was 2347, and humanity had been traveling among the stars for almost 200 years. Captain Daniel Murphy stood on the bridge of his ship, the horizon's edge, watching the endless darkness of space through the main viewing screen. His crew of 400 souls had been on a simple mission, mapping new star systems and looking for planets that might one day become human colonies. It was boring work most of the time, but Daniel had learned to appreciate boring. Boring meant safe. Boring meant everyone went home. Lieutenant Emma Lawson sat at her communications station, her fingers moving across the controls as she monitored the usual background noise of space. She was young, barely 25, but she was good at her job. Daniel had personally requested her for this mission because she had sharp ears and sharper instincts. Those instincts were screaming at her now. "Captain," Emma said, her voice carrying a strange mix of excitement and fear, "I am picking up something unusual. It is not random noise. This signal has a pattern to it. Someone is sending this on purpose." Daniel crossed the bridge in 3 quick steps and looked over her shoulder at the data scrolling across her screen. His heart began to beat faster. For 2 centuries, humanity had wondered if they were alone in the universe. They had found bacteria on Mars, simple organisms in the oceans of Europa, but never anything intelligent, never anyone to talk to. The signal on Emma's screen changed everything. "Are you certain?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes, sir. This is mathematical. Whoever sent this wanted to be understood." First Officer Catherine Price joined them, her dark eyes studying the data with the careful attention of someone who had spent 20 years in space. "We should report this to Earth Command immediately. This is the biggest discovery in human history." Daniel nodded, but before he could give the order, the ship shook violently. Alarms began screaming throughout the bridge. The lights flickered and turned red, bathing everything in the color of blood and danger. "What was that?" Daniel demanded. The tactical officer, a young man named Kevin Ross, looked up from his station with a pale face. "Sir, we have multiple contacts emerging from some kind of space distortion. One count over 200 ships. They are not responding to our identification signals, and they are charging weapons." Daniel felt his stomach drop. 200 ships against 1 survey vessel. Those were not odds anyone could survive. But giving up was not in his nature. It had never been in humanity's nature. "All hands to battle stations," he commanded, his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. "Helm, get us into that asteroid field. If we are going to die today, we are going to make them pay for every life they take." The alien ships opened fire. Energy beams and projectiles filled the space around the horizon's edge. The ship's shields screamed under the assault. Daniel watched on the tactical display as the enemy vessels moved with terrible coordination, like a school of predators closing in on wounded prey. But Daniel Murphy had not survived 30 years in space by being easy prey. The asteroid field was a maze of tumbling rocks, some as small as houses and others as large as mountains. The horizon's edge dove into this chaos, using the asteroids as cover while the alien ships struggled to follow. They were faster than his ship, more heavily armed, but they were also unfamiliar with this kind of fighting. They expected their targets to run in straight lines or surrender. They did not expect a wounded survey vessel to turn and fight like a cornered animal. "Mining lasers online," Catherine reported. "What are you thinking, Captain?" Daniel smiled grimly. "I am thinking we use those lasers to redirect some of these rocks. Let us see how they like having a few million tons of stone thrown at them." The next 14 hours became a nightmare of constant battle. The horizon's edge weaved through the asteroids, hiding, striking, and running again. Daniel used every trick he had ever learned, every desperate tactic he had ever heard of. He pushed asteroids into the path of pursuing ships and watched them explode against the rocks. He hid in the shadow of a massive stone and ambushed 3 enemy vessels as they passed. He ordered his crew to vent atmosphere from damaged sections, creating clouds of debris that confused enemy sensors. One by one, the alien ships began to fall. They were not used to this kind of fighting. They had expected easy victory, and instead they found themselves in a grinding battle. Against an enemy who refused to die quietly, Emma stayed at her station throughout the battle. sending distress calls into the void, hoping someone would hear. Kevin tracked enemy movements until a console explosion killed him. And Catherine took over his duties without missing a beat. Engineers worked in burning corridors to keep the engines running. Medical staff treated the wounded in hallways because the medical bay had been destroyed. Everyone fought. Everyone bled by the time rescue arrived in the form of the 3rd Exploratory Fleet. The Horizon's Edge had destroyed or disabled 17 enemy ships. The cost had been terrible. Of the 400 people who had started that day, only 212 remained alive. The ship itself was barely holding together, its hull blackened by weapons fire, its corridors filled with the dead and dying. Admiral Christopher Lane boarded the ruined vessel and found Daniel Murphy still standing on his damaged bridge, covered in blood and burns but refusing to leave his post. The admiral looked around at the destruction, at the exhausted survivors, at the distant wreckage of enemy ships, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Pride. "Goodwill. Captain Murphy," Christopher said quietly. "You gave us time to respond. You showed them that humans do not die easily." Daniel looked at the bodies being carried past him, at the young faces of crew members who would never see Earth again, who would never hug their families or feel the sun on their skin. Emma was helping to carry Kevin's body, her face wet with tears, but her back straight with determination. "It does not feel like we did well," Daniel replied, his voice hollow. "It feels like we survived. Nothing more." Christopher put a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "Sometimes, Captain, that is the same thing. And sometimes survival is the greatest victory of all. What you did here today will be remembered. Your crew's sacrifice will mean something." Daniel wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that the friends he had lost, the lives that had ended in fire and darkness, had died for a reason. But as he watched the alien wreckage drift among the asteroids, as he thought about the hundreds of ships that had attacked without warning or mercy, he knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had just discovered that they were not alone in the universe. They had also discovered that the universe was not friendly. The signal Emma had found, the proof of intelligent life, had come with a message humanity would never forget. There were monsters among the stars. And now they knew where Earth was. In the weeks that followed the attack on the Horizon's Edge, humanity learned the name of their enemy. Intelligence officers captured data from the destroyed alien ships. Translators worked day and night to understand the language they found. The attackers called themselves the Phyrexian Dominion, and the more humanity learned about them, the more afraid they became. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Green spent 15 years studying the history of human warfare before joining the military. He had written books about ancient battles, about the strategies of generals long dead, about the endless cycle of conflict that seemed to define human civilization. Now he sat in a small office aboard the orbital station New Geneva, surrounded by holographic displays, showing everything they had learned about the Phyrexians. General Patricia Holmes entered the office without knocking. She was a tall woman with gray hair and hard eyes, the commander of all human ground forces. Behind her came Admiral Christopher Lane and a dozen other senior officers. They filled the small space until it felt like there was no room to breathe. "Tell us what we are facing," Patricia said without any greeting. "Tell us everything." Samuel stood and activated the main display. An image appeared showing a Phyrexian warrior. The creature was tall and covered in what looked like scales or hard plates. Its eyes were black and empty, showing no emotion that human expressions could read. Forearms ended in clawed hands, and its mouth was filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh. "The Phyrexian Dominion has existed for over 10,000 years, Samuel began. In that time, they have destroyed more than 40 intelligent species. Their method is simple and effective. They find young civilizations, species that have just begun to explore space, and they attack before those species can develop proper defenses. Some they kill completely, others they enslave. None have ever successfully resisted." Admiral Lane leaned forward. "None? In 10,000 years, no one has fought back?" "Some have tried," Samuel said. "According to their own records, several species attempted to resist. The Phyrexians simply increased the force they used until resistance ended. They have overwhelming numbers, superior technology, and 10,000 years of experience in conquest. Every species that tried to fight eventually surrendered or died. Tricia crossed her arms. And we are supposed to be different? We have been in space for 2 centuries. They have been doing this since before humans learned to write. Samuel changed the display to show human history a timeline of wars and conflicts stretching back thousands of years. That is exactly why we might be different, General. Consider what those 2 centuries of space travel have been for humanity. We had the first colonial rebellion on Mars. We had the belt conflicts between the asteroid miners and the corporations. We had the Jovian crisis and 3 separate wars over resources in the outer solar system. Humanity has been fighting itself across space almost continuously since we left Earth. The room fell silent. Every officer present knew this history. Many had fought in those conflicts themselves. It was not something humanity was proud of. The fact that they could not seem to stop killing each other was considered their greatest failure as a species. You are saying our endless wars are an advantage? Patricia asked. I'm saying that the Vrexians have never faced an enemy like us, Samuel replied. They use overwhelming force against unprepared targets. They have never needed to develop sophisticated tactics because their victims have always been too weak or too surprised to fight effectively. Humans, on the other hand, have been perfecting the art of killing each other for thousands of years. We understand ambush tactics. We understand guerrilla warfare. We understand how to fight when outnumbered and outgunned. He pulled up another display showing Vrexian battle formations. Look at how they fight. They advance in straight lines. They use the same tactics over and over. Why would they change? Their methods have worked for 10,000 years. But those methods only work against enemies who are afraid, who are disorganized, who give up when the situation seems hopeless. Admiral Lane nodded slowly, understanding beginning to show on his face. And humans do not give up. No, sir. No, we do not. It is perhaps our most dangerous quality. When humans are pushed into a corner, when all hope seems lost, we do not surrender. We fight harder. We fight dirtier. We find ways to hurt our enemies that no rational species would even consider. A young officer in the back raised his hand. But surely their technology will overwhelm us. Their ships are more advanced, their weapons more powerful. Samuel smiled grimly. Technology is not everything. History is filled with examples of technologically inferior forces defeating superior enemies through better tactics, better motivation, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The Vrexians expect us to behave like their previous victims. They expect us to panic, to flee, to eventually surrender when the cost becomes too high. He turned off the display and looked around the room at the men and women who would lead humanity through the coming war. They do not understand what they have awakened. The Vrexians see themselves as predators hunting prey. They do not realize that they have attacked the most dangerous predator the galaxy has ever produced. We are a species that has never known peace, that has spent its entire existence fighting for survival. We may not win this war quickly. We may not win it easily, but I believe we can win it. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders and turned to address the other officers. You heard him. We have advantages the enemy does not expect. We know how to fight, and we know how to suffer, and we know how to keep going when everything seems lost. Start working on new tactics. Study those Vrexian formations and find their weaknesses. We are going to teach these monsters that they made a terrible mistake when they chose humanity as their target. As the officers filed out to begin their work, Samuel remained at his desk, staring at the image of the Vrexian warrior still glowing on one of his screens. He believed what he had told them. He believed humanity could win, but he also knew what that victory would cost. The Vrexians had destroyed 40 civilizations. Stopping them would require sacrifices that would make every previous human conflict look small by comparison. The war had barely begun, and already Samuel Green could see the rivers of blood that lay ahead. 3 years into the war, humanity was losing. The colonies at Alpha Centauri had fallen in the first year, their populations either dead or enslaved. The settlements around Tau Ceti burned in the second year, and the refugee ships fleeing those worlds told stories of horror that made grown soldiers weep. Now the Vrexians were pushing toward Earth itself, and it seemed that nothing could stop them, but something strange was happening. Something the Vrexians had never experienced before. They were winning every battle, but they were not winning the war. Every human colony they conquered cost them ships they could not easily replace. Every world they occupied became a nightmare of resistance fighters, sabotage, and endless small attacks that bled their forces one cut at a time. Commander Lisa Harper, crouched in the ruins of what had once been a shopping center on the occupied world of New Chicago. Before the invasion, she had been a school teacher, spending her days helping children learn to read and do mathematics. Now she led a resistance cell of 300 fighters who had spent 18 months making life miserable for the Vrexian occupation forces. Beside her, Sergeant Matthew Cole checked his rifle for the 100th time. He had been a farmer before the war, a quiet man who had never held a weapon in his life. The Vrexians had killed his 7-year-old daughter in the first attack on New Chicago. Since then, he had killed more aliens than he could count, and he intended to keep killing until they were all gone or he was dead. "They are moving a supply convoy through the Eastern District tonight," Lisa whispered, studying a small screen that showed troop movements. 12 vehicles, maybe 40 warriors as guards. Matthew nodded. "We can hit them at the old bridge. The road narrows there. They will not be able to spread out or retreat easily." Lisa looked at her sergeant, at the hard lines that war had carved into his face. She remembered when he had first joined her group, a broken man who could barely speak through his grief. Now he was one of her best fighters, cold and efficient and utterly without mercy. "We have maybe 50 fighters who can make it to that location in time," Lisa said. "That is not good odds against 40 Vrexians." "Since when do we care about odds?" Matthew replied. "My daughter was 7 years old. She was scared of the dark. She liked to draw pictures of butterflies. They killed her because she happened to be in the wrong place when they attacked. I do not care about odds. I care about making them pay." Lisa understood. Everyone in her resistance cell had similar stories. They had all lost someone. They were all fighting for ghosts, for memories, for the simple need to hurt the creatures that had hurt them. It was not rational. A rational person would have calculated the odds and surrendered long ago. But humans were not rational, not when it came to protecting their own, not when it came to avenging the dead. The ambush went exactly as planned. Lisa's fighters waited until the Vrexian convoy was in the middle of the bridge, then attacked from 3 directions at once. The aliens were caught completely off guard. They were used to overwhelming force. 2 enemies who ran or hid. They were not prepared for humans who charged directly at them, screaming with rage, fighting hand to hand when their weapons ran dry. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, every Vrexian guard was dead, and the supply vehicles were burning. Lisa had lost 8 fighters, 8 more names to add to the long list of the dead, but she had also denied the enemy supplies they desperately needed, and more importantly, she had shown them that nowhere on this planet was safe. Far from New Chicago, in the cold darkness of space, Admiral Jennifer Stone was developing new tactics that would change the course of the war. Her 4th fleet had been reduced to barely 30 ships, a tiny force compared to the hundreds of vessels the Vrexians could field. Direct confrontation was suicide. So Jennifer had stopped fighting directly. She called her strategy Wolfpack tactics. Small groups of fast ships would hide in asteroid fields or among the debris of destroyed colonies, waiting for Vrexian supply convoys to pass. Then they would strike hard and fast, destroying cargo ships and crippling escorts before vanishing back into the void. It was the same approach Lisa Harper used on the ground, translated to the vast distances of space. "We cannot beat them in a straight fight," Jennifer told her captains during a briefing aboard her flagship. "The relentless hope. So we will not fight straight. We will hurt them in ways they have never experienced. We will make them afraid to travel between their own systems. Every corner of space might hide human ships waiting to tear them apart." The Wolfpack tactics worked better than anyone had hoped. Vrexian supply ships began arriving at their destinations damaged or not at all. Vrexian warriors who had never known fear in their lives began to hesitate before entering empty regions of space. The hunters were becoming the hunted, unoccupied worlds. Resistance cells like Lisa's coordinated their attacks, striking at multiple targets simultaneously to overwhelm Vrexian response forces. In space, Jennifer's wolf packs grew bolder, hitting larger convoys and even attacking isolated warships when the opportunity presented itself. The Vrexians responded with increasing brutality. They executed civilian populations in retaliation for resistance attacks. They destroyed entire cities from orbit to deny the humans hiding places. But every atrocity only made humanity fight harder. Every death created new fighters who had nothing left to lose. By the end of the third year, the Vrexians had committed over 60% of their military forces to HFY War against humanity. They controlled most of human space, but that control was fragile. Constantly threatened by guerrilla attacks and space raids, they had expected an easy conquest. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a war that seemed to have no end. Lisa Harper stood in the ruins of New Chicago, watching smoke rise from another successful ambush, and she allowed herself a small moment of hope. They were still losing. They might continue losing for years. But they were also making the Vrexians pay for every inch of ground, every life they took. And somewhere, in the back of her mind, she began to believe that humanity might actually survive this. They might even win. Far from the burning worlds and bloodied ships of human space, in a region of the galaxy that humanity had not yet reached, the Galactic Council observed the war with growing amazement and fear. The Council was an assembly of 17 spacefaring civilizations, species that had survived Vrexian aggression by banding together and essentially paying tribute to avoid destruction. For thousands of years, they had maintained this fragile peace, watching helplessly as the Dominion conquered, destroyed younger species. They had watched the beginning of the human war with the same helpless sadness they always felt when a new species fell to the Vrexians. They had expected it to be over quickly, as it always was. Now, 7 years into the conflict, they were beginning to realize that something unprecedented was happening. Ambassador, the Fletix of the Valanthe floated in her liquid-filled chamber, her long tentacles curling with agitation as she addressed the gathered representatives. Her species was ancient, peaceful, and had nearly been destroyed by the Vrexians 3,000 years ago. The memory of that near extinction still haunted her people. The latest intelligence reports are remarkable, Zethric said, her voice translated by machines into sounds all species present could understand. The humans have retaken 2 of their lost colony worlds. Their fleet, which we estimated to be nearly destroyed, has somehow grown larger than it was before the war began. They are now conducting offensive operations into Vrexian territory. Murmurs of disbelief filled the great chamber. Counselor Thren, an ancient being whose body was more machine than organic after millennia of existence, leaned forward with interest. His species had been among the first victims of Vrexian aggression, and he had spent 5,000 years watching other species fall. How is this possible? Thren asked. The Dominion committed overwhelming force to this conflict. No species has ever recovered from such an assault. Observer Kethis stepped forward to explain. His role in the council was to study alien species, to understand their psychology, and predict their behavior. He had been studying humanity intensively since the war began, and what he had learned disturbed him deeply. The humans are not like us, Kethis said simply. I have spent 7 years trying to understand their psychology, and I am still not certain I fully comprehend it. They possess qualities that are extremely rare in intelligent species, qualities that make them uniquely dangerous in warfare. The chamber fell silent, waiting for him to continue. First, they have an extraordinary capacity for sustained aggression. Most species, when facing overwhelming odds, will eventually calculate that continued resistance is pointless and surrender to preserve what remains of their population. Humans do not seem capable of this calculation. They continue fighting long past the point where any rational analysis would tell them to stop. Kethis pulled up a display showing human casualties, numbers so large they seemed almost unreal. They have lost approximately 4 billion individuals in this war. 4 billion. Any other species would have surrendered after losing a fraction of that number. The humans responded by increasing their military production and attacking harder. Ambassador Zethrix's tentacles trembled. That is madness, perhaps Kethis agreed. Or perhaps it is something else. The humans have a concept that is difficult to translate into our languages. The closest word would be spite. It means the willingness to accept harm to oneself in order to inflict harm upon an enemy. Humans will sacrifice their own lives, their own worlds, their own future, simply to ensure that those who hurt them are hurt in return. Thren processed this information slowly. You are saying they fight not to win, but to cause pain? I am saying they fight for both reasons simultaneously. They want to survive, yes. But if survival becomes impossible, they would rather destroy their enemies than save themselves. This makes them impossible to negotiate with in the traditional sense. You cannot threaten a human with death, because they will accept death if it means taking you with them. The council members exchanged worried glances. They had always believed that the Vexians were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Now they were beginning to wonder if something even more dangerous had emerged. There is another quality, Kethis continued. Humans call it hope. Even in the darkest moments of this war, when all logic suggested they would be destroyed, they continued to believe they could win. This belief sustained them through losses that would have broken any other species, and now that belief is being justified. They are winning. A young representative from a recently contacted species spoke up. But surely this is good news? If the humans defeat the Vexians, we will finally be free of their threat. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to say it aloud. Finally, Thren spoke the words that haunted them all. If the humans defeat the Dominion, what then? Will they turn their spite upon us? Will they remember that we watched their species bleed for 7 years without offering assistance? We have 17 civilizations in this council, trillions of individuals among us. We could have intervened. We could have helped them. We chose not to because we calculated that they would lose, and intervention would only bring Vexian attention to ourselves. It was a reasonable decision. Zethrix protested weakly. It was a cowardly decision, Thren replied. And humans, according to our observer, do not forgive or forget. We abandoned them when they needed us most. What reason do they have to treat us as anything other than enemies? Kethis nodded slowly. This is the question I cannot answer. I have studied humans extensively, but I still do not fully understand them. They are capable of tremendous cruelty, as they have demonstrated against the Vexians. But they are also capable of tremendous compassion. Their history shows both qualities in equal measure. The council debated for hours without reaching any conclusion. Some argued that they should reach out to the humans immediately, offering assistance and alliance before the war ended. Others believed that any approach would be seen as opportunistic, an attempt to gain favor with the winning side. Still others suggested that perhaps they should prepare to defend themselves against human aggression. In the end, they decided to do nothing, which was what they always did. They would wait and watch, as they had waited and watched for thousands of years. They would see what kind of species emerged from the fires of war. Whether humanity would prove to be saviors or merely new tyrants. But deep in their hearts, every member of the Galactic Council felt a cold fear taking root. They had watched humanity fight and die without lifting a finger to help. Now humanity was winning, and soon they would come to claim their place among the stars. What would they say when they arrived? The war lasted 11 years. It did not end with a peace treaty or a gradual stop to the fighting. It ended with the complete and total destruction of the Vexian Dominion. Human forces, joined by slaves and conquered species who saw their chance at freedom, pushed through enemy space system by system, world by world, until nothing remained of the empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years. The final battle took place above the Vexian homeworld. Admiral Jennifer Stone would started the war commanding 30 battered ships using Wolfpack tactics to survive. Now led a fleet of over 2,000 vessels. They were joined by fighters from dozens of species that had been enslaved by the Dominion. Beings who had finally found hope when they saw humanity refuse to surrender. The Vexians fought to the end. They had no concept of surrender, no ability to imagine a universe in which they were not the dominant power. So they died fighting, and when the last of their warships was destroyed, their homeworld was left to face judgment alone. Jennifer looked at that world through her viewing screen, felt nothing but exhaustion. She had been fighting for 11 years. She had lost count of the battles, the friends who had died, the moments when she had believed everything was lost. Now it was over, and she did not know what to feel. The surface is requesting terms of surrender. Her communications officer reported Jennifer considered the request. The Virexians on that world were civilians, workers and farmers and families who had probably never held a weapon in their lives. They had not personally destroyed human colonies or enslaved alien species. They were simply born into a civilization that had done terrible things. Accept the surrender, Jennifer said finally. We are not them. We do not kill those who cannot fight back. It was a decision that would be debated for generations. Some argued that mercy was weakness, that the Virexians would have shown no mercy to humanity. Others believed that becoming monsters to defeat monsters was no victory at all. Jennifer did not care about the debates. She knew what she could live with, and slaughtering civilians was not it. 3 months later, the human delegation arrived at the Galactic Council. Captain Rebecca Ward commanded the leading ship, the dreadnought Bloody Morning. She was 34 years old and had been fighting since she was 23. Her parents had died in the attack on Mars. Her brother had died defending New Berlin. Her husband had died in the final assault on the Virexian homeworld just weeks before victory. She had lost everything except her ship and her crew, and now she was being asked to speak for all of humanity. The fleet that accompanied her consisted of 17 warships, one for each civilization in the Galactic Council. It was a message that needed no translation. Every ship bore the scars of battle, their hulls patched and burned. Their weapons still dark with the residue of recent fighting. They had not stopped to repair or rest. They had come directly from the front lines, wearing their wounds like medals of honor. We are receiving hails from the council station, said Lieutenant Gregory Palmer, her young communications officer. They are welcoming us and asking us to dock. Rebecca looked at the gleaming stations and pristine ships of the council. These beings had watched humanity fight and die for 11 years without offering any help. They had calculated that humans would lose and decided not to risk themselves. Now they wanted to welcome the survivors as friends. Tell them we will dock when we are ready, Rebecca said. For now, we maintain our current position. The human fleet took up formation around the council station. It was not an aggressive stance, but it was not friendly either. The message was clear to everyone watching. We are here, we are powerful, and we will not be told what to do. The formal meeting happened 3 days later. In the great chamber where the council conducted its business, representatives of all 17 species had gathered to welcome humanity to the galactic community. Rebecca walked into that chamber with her head held high, wearing her dress uniform but making no effort to hide the scars on her face or the weariness in her eyes. Ambassador Zethrix gave the welcoming address. Her words translated into human language by machines. On behalf of the Galactic Council, we extend our greetings to humanity. Your victory over the Virexian Dominion is unprecedented in our history. You have accomplished what we believed impossible. We offer you a place among us as equals and partners. Rebecca stepped forward to respond. The chamber fell silent. For 11 years, we fought alone, she began, her voice calm and steady. For 11 years, we watched our people die while the galaxy did nothing. When the Virexians first attacked us, we sent calls for help into the darkness, hoping that somewhere out there, someone might stand with us. No one answered. She paused, looking around at the assembled aliens. We learned later that you existed. We learned that you had been watching. We learned that you could have helped us but chose not to. You calculated that we would lose, that helping us would only bring danger to yourselves. So you watched from safety while we bled. The council members shifted uncomfortably. None of them could meet her eyes. I am not here to condemn you for that choice, Rebecca continued. In your position, perhaps we would have done the same. I am here to tell you that we remember. Humanity does not forget those who abandoned us in our darkest hour, any more than we forget those who attacked us. We will accept your offer of membership in this council because it serves our interests. But do not mistake necessity for friendship." She straightened her shoulders. "You want to know what we are? You want to know if you should fear us? The answer is that you should respect us. We are not conquerors. We have no desire to rule over others or take what is not ours. But we are survivors, and we will never again be weak enough to need help that does not come." The chamber remained silent as Rebecca spoke her final words. "Humanity has arrived. We came here in bloodied ships because we wanted you to see what it cost us to reach this moment. We wanted you to understand that we earned our place among the stars with sacrifice you cannot imagine. And we wanted you to know that we will never, ever forget." The human delegation turned and walked out, leaving the council to contemplate what had just happened. Outside, the human fleet still hung in space, battered and scarred, but unbroken. They were a warning and a promise. A reminder of what humanity had endured and what humanity had become. The galaxy would never be the same. A new power had arrived, forged in fire and blood, and the universe would have to make room for them, whether it wanted to or not. Humanity had come home to the stars. They were not going anywhere.